Oh, um, sorry. Um, have you ever felt so rushed that you're a little distracted in what you're supposed to do? Um, uh, have you felt rushed today? Like making sure you get out the door on time to get to this event, making sure you take the time to make sure that your makeup and your hair is perfect. How rushed have you felt today in trying to keep up with all the emails and the information and the data so you don't develop FOMO and feel like you keep falling behind? I want to share some ideas with you today about how I think we can bend time, the way we see time, the way we experience time, so that we can improve the time that we have on this planet. And I'm going to use two concepts to do that. I think you're probably familiar with the first, and I hope everyone is equally familiar with the second. The first is money. The second is compassion. Let's begin with money, money, money. And we'll take a step back to 1776 when this really old Scottish guy was writing down his life's work. His name was Adam Smith. And he wrote a tedious, verbose tome that if you have trouble sleeping, I highly recommend you pick it up. It will knock you out and you can use it as a pillow. But it's also seen as the foundation for commerce as we know it. It's called The Wealth of Nations. And in this book, it talks about how we think about and supply and demand and how all of this works. And there's a current theme that runs through the whole book that says without this one thing, none of commerce would work as we know it. Does anyone know what that is? Scarcity. Scarcity drives commerce and business. Which is to say, if you have something and you want to sell it and you don't have enough of it, you can up the price for what you do have and generate more wealth and generate more money. If you create a narrative to say that you don't have enough of that thing, even if you do, you can still jack up the price, generate more revenue, generate more money. Scarcity, scarcity, scarcity is how we run businesses and commerce as we know it. Now, I'm a nurse. And I started nursing school in 2007. I became an emergency trauma nurse. And I remember early in my nursing education, learning early on about this scarcity, this nursing shortage. We don't have enough nurses. As I pursued my doctoral degree in public health, studying resilience and compassion and well-being, I started studying the history of nursing. I read about the great Mary Seacole and her early work supporting soldiers during the Crimean War, and learned even back then, we didn't have enough nurses. Scarcity seems to be everywhere. Opposite of scarcity is this idea of abundance. And I would say anathema to scarcity is abundance, such that when abundance shows up in the room, scarcity goes and hides in a corner. I am learning that with abundance comes hand in hand compassion. And I want to talk to you a little bit about this project that I'm working on, learning about how we better teach, learn, experience, and share compassion. I don't have a lot of time. And as I do this project, I keep thinking about this phrase, time is money. We have to go, we have to go, we have to go. And I think about Adam Smith, that had he written these words in his book, he probably would have saved about 100 pages. But I think we can slow down. And as I do this project and trying to learn more about compassion and slowing down, I've interviewed business leaders, nurses, physicians, and artists, asking them, for you, what does compassion look like? New Yorker cartoonist Benjamin Schwartz sent me this cartoon, and he said, this is what compassion looks like to me. And I think this holds true for many of us. We don't have time for compassion because time is money. How do you make money off compassion? But it excites me that many of the other narratives that people have submitted have talked about instances when they didn't feel like they had time, but as nurses and physicians especially, they said they took the time to offer compassion. They realized that they did. This month, just over a decade ago, I had the profound opportunity to work with an organization called Partners in Health. I worked as a frontline nurse in a small community called Port Loco, Sierra Leone. I was working with people who were affected and afflicted by Ebola. At one point during my time there, our Ebola treatment center was the hottest hot zone in the region, meaning we had more patients than any other Ebola treatment centers in Liberia or Guinea or Sierra Leone. And I remember one particularly challenging day. I was working with a young man. He was 28 years old. He and his wife came to our Ebola treatment center. They were both sick with Ebola, and I watched them go through the turmoils of fighting against this disease in a place that was very scarce when it comes to supplies, PPE, medications. We did all we could for our teams. And I remember working with him and his wife and how they would talk about, as sick as they were, how they couldn't wait to go home because they had a young toddler waiting for them. And that was a light for the two of them. And even as his wife's light ended when she succumbed to the disease, and he sat next to her as she took her last breath, he still said, "She will be happy when I go home to see our son." He survived Ebola and he went home. He had a week together with his toddler son, and then unfortunately his son spiked a fever, which is the first symptom of Ebola. They returned to our Ebola treatment center. We knew him well. We actually hugged him as he came back in, and we said, "We're gonna do everything we can to care for your son." And we did, but unfortunately his son did not survive. The day his son died was one of our busiest days in the treatment center, and we were hustling, trying to see as many patients as we could. And my partner, Chuck Callahan, looked at me, put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Tim, you need to go sit with that young man. He has now lost everything." And in my mind, I thought, I can't do that. We don't have time. We have literally 80 other patients to see. But I sat, I paused, I made eye contact with this young man. We held each other's gaze and we held each other's hands. And time stood still. I don't know how much time we spent there in that moment. But what I do remember is that when I went back to work, I got everything done. I felt extremely efficient. I felt like that day, as heartbroken as I was, I am here on this planet for a reason. I have value as a nurse, and I am practicing at the top of my license. What's cool about compassion is that it's much more than anecdote and stories. Researcher Demisela Gutierrez, psychologist, has done extraordinary work comparing folks with a compassion meditation practice, which is metta meditation, to folks without. And she has found that when people with this practice, and we know that meditation is one way that you can learn compassion, people with that practice have a different sense of time. What she did was she had all the participants in the study do some exams while a metronome, was ticking back and forth. And folks with the meditation practice talked about this as if there was more space between the beats compared to the other group. People sensed time differently. A decade ago, when I was a professor at the University of Virginia, I became very inspired by a thing called the medical pause. It was created by a nurse named John Bartels, and it looks like this. When a patient dies in a clinical setting, someone on the team says, "Let's pause for a few seconds to honor the life in front of us that just ended. We may have known them, we may not have known them, but we can know that they loved and that they were loved. We can know they were a part of a family, so let's pause silently to honor that." The team sits or stands for a few seconds in silence, and then they go back to work. I was able to work with my then postdoc, Dr. Ebru Shair, who led this research, and we found that when teams of nurses, physicians, and nurse practitioners practiced the pause, even for a few seconds, we saw a significant increase in heart rate variability. And you may know that when heart rate variability goes up, so too does our ability to be more pro-social, which is to say, to be more connected, more present, to have control over our time and how we offer compassion to other people. When we practice compassion, we experience abundance. When we experience abundance, we see and know and feel we have the ability to expand our compassionate reach. Now, some of you are probably still thinking, but what about the money? So let's go back to the money. In his book, Decolonizing Wealth, author Edgar Villanueva looks closely at business leaders across the US and has found some interesting things in his research. He has found that when leaders put abundance over scarcity, when they choose to lead from a place of abundance, their teams report feeling more engaged. Their teams report feeling more trust amongst each other and with their clients. Their teams report being less likely to quit and leave. And what does that do? We know in the evidence that when teams feel engaged, efficiency goes up, productivity goes up. So if you still want to make some money, you want an engaged team because you're going to generate more revenue. We know that when there's trust amongst teams, innovation can flourish. And when innovation flourishes, so too does a sense of abundance, so too does revenue over time. And finally, when people stop quitting and leaving the workforce, you have revenue protection, which means you're not spending all this money to replace the people that have chosen to leave. Some of you may still believe that time is money. I will respectfully disagree. I firmly believe that time is far more valuable. So my question for you before I walk off this stage, knowing that you have the choice between abundance and scarcity, compassion and status quo, what will you choose? And how will you invest your time? Thank you.